Okay. All right. Let's get this party started.
Let's do it.
Yes. So, again, welcome everyone to our Let's Talk About It program called Our Quality of Life as Long-Term Breast Cancer Survivors. So, you know what, Emily? Can you stop sharing your screen for a moment so I can look at some people because I got a question to ask before we get started. Is this your first time coming to Let's Talk About It program? No? Lily's like, no.
Yes.
Virginia's like, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, everyone, this is going to be a conversation. This is just us hanging out in our living rooms or wherever we are. And so please feel free that you can take yourself put yourself on camera if you want. This is all for us to connect and share and get informed. And I really want to make sure that you know that this is a safe space for you. Now, you're probably wondering, who am I? Who am I? For those that don't know, I'm Megan Claire Chase. And yes, Megan Claire is the first name. It is.
Recording in progress.
Uh-oh. Jackie? Hold on, Jackie. I'm going to mute you. Oop. There we go. All right. So I am Megan Claire Chase, and I am the director of the early stage breast cancer programs here at SHARE. And I'm also a breast cancer survivor. In fact, my cancerversary was last week of getting the cancer call. But before we officially get started with our amazing speaker and conversation, just going to tell you a little bit more about SHARE for those who are new, like Virginia told us. So SHARE is a national nonprofit that supports, educates, and empowers anyone who has been diagnosed with women's cancers and provides outreach to the general public about signs and symptoms, because no one should have to face breast, ovarian, uterine, cervical, or metastatic breast cancer alone. And for more information about upcoming webinars, our educational webinars, support groups, and our helplines, please visit our website at sharecancersupport.org. Now, as I said in the beginning, for those who didn't hear, this is going to be a conversation. All right, this is casual, but we're going to get some information. And y'all, I'm so excited for our presenter. So you may be hearing a little bit of a Southern twang coming out because, hey, it's after 5 p.m. The accent comes out. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm proud to bring some more Atlanta, Georgia up in here with our speaker for tonight. So, Emily, take it away.
Well, now you made me feel like I need to do my down-home Southern twang. I was born in Atlanta, but I was born to Michigan and Pennsylvania natives. And so my people are always so disappointed when I tell them I'm from Atlanta and they say, well, where's your accent? And then I throw in a y'all, and usually that keeps them comfortable. But thank you so much, Megan Claire, for that intro and just for creating this space for us to have this conversation. I have been a huge fan of SHARE for years. I started out as an oncology nurse about 20 years ago, and it got real for me when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2005. And then multiple other folks in my family and close to me have been diagnosed. I've got just surrounded by cancer. I am not a survivor myself, but I am what I call a co-survivor, or I don't know, caregiver isn't exactly the right word because I'm more of a journeyer than a giver of care. But I am a nurse. I work as a navigator, have worked as a navigator, currently in program coordination. So I have loved giving SHARE as a resource to patients over the years and have always appreciated all of their great work. So it's exciting for me to be here with y'all and look forward to this conversation. And as Megan Claire said, I really want this to be a conversation. So I'm going to start the conversation, but I'd like y'all to feel free to chime in every few minutes. I might, or Megan Claire may put a question out there. Feel free to type in the chat, take yourself off mute and speak up. We'd love to hear your voices. So hopefully this can be just kind of an informal chat. Ready to get started?
No, he's looking at you.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
General breast cancer support group and the metastatic breast cancer support
Uh-oh.
group. These are offered in a hybrid model.
Are you there?
I gotcha.
I'm hearing some feedback. Okay, that was you. Okay, I was like, is that me? Am I doing that? So I love this topic. Quality of life is something that I think all of us obviously can relate to, but I think as people that have lived with breast cancer for a few years, I think it is especially important. And as a nurse and as a patient advocate, I love to make space for this conversation because I think it is so incredibly important for those of you who are truly living with this. It feels like people have told me it's, everything from uncertainty to, this sort of ebb and flow of gratitude, but also anger and sadness and frustration and, all of the things. So this topic is great. And I hope that it's something we can revisit again and again, because I think we can't possibly get to everything that we want to talk about in an hour, but let's give it a shot. So let's see. Let me see if I can. Oh, okay, I got it. This is me. Who am I? This is me. I just included a couple pictures here. So again, I'm a nurse. My training is as an oncology certified nurse and breast cancer nurse certified. I've been navigating patients since 2007. But again, before that, I was really my mom's caregiver, my mom's support person, starting in 2005. And before that, for my grandmother who had ovarian cancer, actually before I even became a nurse. So I refer to myself as I said, a co-survivor. I'm also a caregiver coach, so I work with caregivers. I like to be available to the folks that are standing alongside, and just being an extra space for them as well. So a lot of this perspective that I'm going to talk, it comes from that. And so I want to honor y'all as survivors, but also, my perspective is definitely as a nurse, as somebody that has been in the caregiving role. And this is a picture of my mom down here at the bottom with all the presents behind us. That was at my bridal shower. That was right after she was diagnosed, and she was still smiling, but it was, when I look at that picture, I see a whole story there beyond, the happy times that we were trying to celebrate with my life. So it kind of sums up the happy and the challenging. And then this is us last couple months ago at a gala with our silly costumes on. That's my mom in the green mask. That's my daughter with the silly tiara. And then this is Mary over here on the side next to me. She is the CEO of Team Maggie, which is an organization that I'm proud to be on the board of. We do fertility preservation for cancer patients. And Maggie is Mary's daughter. And so my story is really one of, mothers, daughters, women empowering women, finding solutions to difficult problems. So I just wanted to put that in there as my introduction. So looking forward to this conversation. And this group of folks up here is my team. That's my physician outreach, my group that I work with every day. So I am one of many. I certainly can't do this work alone. So that is my Northside crew there. So let's jump right into it. When we talk about long-term survivorship, as I had said a few minutes ago, what people tend to think about are a lot of emotions, and it's not just happy and sad, right? It's complex. And sometimes I was at a retreat this last weekend, and somebody was referring to the sort of feelings they have about cancer as being, this sort of stream in the background. Sometimes it's like a little trickling stream that's barely there and barely noticeable. And sometimes it's a raging river. It's like this kind of ebbs and flows. And it can be anything from, I talked about gratitude, anger, grief, loss, fear, and it changes from day to day. So when you think about your long-term survivorship, I'd love for y'all to just put in the chat or come off mute and just say some of the words that you that resonate with you? What are some of the things that y'all think about?
I'll kick us off, y'all. I'll say anger. I had a lot of anger once I started processing, once I was done with my active treatments. There's just a lot of anger over how everything changed. I'm gonna start calling on people.
The one I hear a lot is uncertainty, and just that kind of loss of control. I don't know that it's really what the emotion that goes along with that is exactly, but fear certainly, or frustration, exhaustion.
Yeah, and Virginia just put in the chat, fear over recurrence. Cancer
Yeah.
showed up out of the blue. How do we live knowing it could, reoccur?
Yes, we will get to that. I think that's the big one, right? Especially as we get further out from the diagnosis. You mentioned the cancerversary, that's a big one. And we'll talk a little bit about it. And I think for a lot of folks, it's this paradox, right? It's this feeling of like, it's all of it. It's all a mixed bag because you, of course, are grateful for the treatments that have kept you here, that you put you into remission, or that are allowing you to live with cancer if that's your situation. But it can be, I'm grateful to be a survivor, but I'm also disappointed, right? Like, I'm disappointed that things aren't the way I thought they would be. So I think that's really at the crux of this whole issue of long-term survivorship, is this ability to hold sort of multiple, you might call it duality, or you might call it polarity, you might call it a paradox. So whatever that thing is that sort of allows you to be, feeling all things. And I think that can be exhausting, right? It's exhausting to hold all of that.
And I did want to say, we had someone in the chat say another feeling is vulnerable. And I totally can resonate with that. How about all of y'all? Can you resonate with that feeling vulnerable? Because it's like, you don't know this body anymore, right? Because it had cancer in it. And now you feel vulnerable to, what else could happen?
And
Yeah.
I see Jacqueline's talking about after effects of treatment neuropathy. So we'll get into that as well. Some of the physical effects, the late effects, those we call them, the things that we kind of expect to come up for folks, who've had treatment. I see Susan is talking about finding a job. Such a huge thing with workplace issues. How does our workplace accommodate our needs as cancer survivors, particularly if there are actual accommodations that are needed, if you need to be able to work in a certain environment, or take breaks, and depending on the job, obviously that all can be relevant in different ways. But absolutely, I think the uncertainty of how it impacts our employment, and then of course how that impacts everything else, right? Like our financial toxicity and our financial well-being. And Jennifer's saying that she felt loss and grief, but also gratitude for community. So there's that paradox again, right? It's like thankful for what I'm receiving, but also this is really hard, and this is not what I thought it was going to be, and I'm disappointed. And all of that can be true at the same time. So I just want to hold space for that. And I think too often, and I think we, particularly as healthcare providers, are guilty of this. We too often kind of minimize sometimes the difficulty, where we say things like, "Oh, aren't you so grateful?" Or well, it could be worse, or everything happens for a reason, or all of these maxims that are just frankly not helpful at all, right? Like at all. So I really try to hold that space for when I'm seeing a patient, not to just assume that they're having a bad day, but also not to assume that they should be feeling like they're having a good day, so just to think, hey, how's it going? And be okay when they say, well, it's been better, and meet them, where they are. So I think appreciate all of your responses here. I'm looking through disbelief. Yeah, how could this happen? Like, what in the world? I think that's especially true for those of us who are diagnosed, early in life, midstream, right? Mid relationship, mid work, productivity. And, it's hard to establish that. I love that. Hard to reestablish self-confidence. Thank you for these responses. I'm looking through them. And I see fear of recurrence and that vulnerability. And we are going to talk about pain here in just a minute. Thank y'all. Thanks for jumping right in. I appreciate the responses. Great. So when we talk about this paradox, sorry, I'm trying to get my slides. There we go. We think about mindset. So what is the mindset? And again, I think the trap is for other people and for greeting card companies and TV and, self-help to tell us, oh, we should have a positive attitude. You should just, you can just give yourself, hugs and look yourself in the mirror and, say words to make yourself feel better. Well, yeah, that could help sometimes, but it's also important to recognize that, some of that can be toxic and can be difficult for us, right? So, I'm a fan of what I call both and thinking. So it's this idea, again, like the paradox that we talked about in the last slide. It's this, I can be grateful to be alive, right? And also angry when I look in the mirror and I see that my breasts now are covered with scars, or that where the skin where my breasts used to be, if I've had a mastectomy, or even if I've had a lumpectomy and I've had radiation, I might have a breast that's half the size of the other breast, and I may not feel good about it looking closed. So it's okay to say, I'm lucky to be alive. I'm lucky to be here. I'm lucky to still be here with my family. But I'm also angry and sad, or whatever that may be. It could be that I'm happy to have a partner. I've had a supportive partner that's been with me through this. And also, I'm disappointed that that my sex life isn't what it was, or what I want it to be, what I thought it would be, or as satisfying as it was once upon a time. If you don't know her, I'm a huge fan of Kate Bowler. She is a stage 4 colon cancer survivor, and she has an awesome podcast and some books that she's written. She is a her perspective is from a faith-based perspective. I'm trying to think. She's a professor at Duke Divinity School, and so she has a little bit of that kind of church background. But I will say that she's very welcoming, and her language is affirming really of all belief systems. So I really appreciate her take. But this picture is one of her quotes, and it's in Durham in North Carolina. It says, "Life is so beautiful, life is so hard." And so it's this idea of this paradox that we're talking about. But if you don't know about Kate, check her out. She's great. Her book is called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lives I've Loved. So it's really all about, how people kind of managed when she was diagnosed with cancer, how they, kept telling her things that were really not helpful at all to her coping. So anyway, just wanted to give that to you as kind of a place to start. And, I think of this sometimes as the sweet and sour approach. So it's kind of like, focus on the positive, but let's also not minimize the difficulty and the sour, right? Because it's still there. So in terms of our, long-term effects, we're talking about, what are these things that we live with as long-term cancer survivors? What is this sort of state that we're in mentally? And these are just some of the ones that I see most often. So you could certainly throw out many others, and I'd welcome you to put some in the chat as well. We saw some of these earlier in the chat when we said, what are some of the feelings or the emotions? So fear of recurrence, anxiety. We have this term now, scanxiety, which is a real thing, right? You're going to get your 6-month scan or 1-year scan, and many of you probably aren't even getting scans because many of you are probably far enough out that your doctor may have said, you know what, we're not going to scan anymore. We're going to just, look for signs and symptoms, and we're just going to kind of see you when we see you, right? And give you the high sign and wave. And that can be incredibly anxiety provoking, especially if you're used to having that reassurance or that connection with your provider, on a more regular basis. So would love to hear from anybody, who's experiencing that. And scan anxiety, I think, is one of those things that, nowadays that we have access to portals and information, it can be better and it can also be worse, because you can be in a situation where you're able to access the information, but you don't have anybody that you can necessarily reach to kind of go over it with you. And so, I really want to hear about that, if that's something that y'all have experienced.
Yeah. So, Emily, you bring up a good point. And everyone, please chime in, in the chat, or come off mute to say something. But I do think it's like, yes, we want our results, or or blood test, or what have you. And I personally struggle with that, because I want the information, but then I'm like, wait, if it's something that I'm not quite understanding, and I'm seeing a word that I don't quite know, and it just looks bad, you start to panic, and then the anxiety starts to go, then that fear of recurrence starts to go, and you just go down a rabbit hole. And I like the fact that we can get our results so quickly now, depending on where you are, what that test is, right? But I do see that downside of it too, of it causing even more anxiety, more insomnia. Anyone suffer from pain somnia? I call it pain somnia, because I saw someone else was mentioning in the chat that they haven't slept in 26 years. Oh my goodness. I get that too, right? Because some of us are dealing with pain, and I don't know about the rest of y'all. I'd love to hear this in the chat. How many of you thought that you would have to deal with pain once you were in the survivorship stage? And I call it pain somnia, because it's the pain that's keeping me up.
Yeah. I'm just seeing more messages, just saying yes. I recognize, I feel the same.
And then there's the uncertainty. You don't know whether it's from the cancer or for the treatment, or whether it's just something else.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things I wanted to just offer was some discussion around, how do we handle this time, right? How do we handle the scan anxiety, especially, or the fear, when you're waiting for that information? Some people have just a practice where it's like, I'm just gonna have willpower, and I'm not gonna look at the report until I have a chance to talk it over with my provider. Some people just know for their own mental health, it's like, I'm just gonna pretend like I don't have access to that report. In some hospitals and some systems don't. So I know it's not everybody has access to their report. I know for many of my patients, I encourage them to kind of ask ahead of time. Say, what is the plan? Like, what is the expectation? I'm going to have the scan, at 8 o'clock in the morning on Thursday. Am I going to go through the whole weekend wondering what the scan said? Or, is there somebody in the office that I can talk to, Friday morning, first thing Friday morning, or make an appointment? Or how can we kind of go through how this is going to go? And often there's a nurse practitioner, a PA, somebody in the practice who is available, who can be reached to kind of go through those things. So if that's something that you're struggling with, and like, how do I handle that? Think about coming up with a plan. It doesn't have to be the plan I just suggested, but, or maybe it's a buddy that you check in with, that's like your kind of check-in buddy until you kind of know what the plan is going to be, or what the results are going to show. As far as sleep goes, I think, a lot of it is, anxiety and fear, concern. So, I think getting to the bottom of that is helpful. If the sleep is something that's related to your medication, if it's something to do with your, if you're on like estrogen blockade, for example, is known to interrupt, estrogen deprivation can cause issues with sleep. So it may be that there's some, symptom management strategy that you can talk to with your provider and say, hey, look, I'm having a really hard time sleeping. And maybe you've been able to pinpoint, maybe it's been since you've been on tamoxifen or on Arimidex or one of the, aromatase inhibitors or one of your other medications, Faslodex. I don't need to say them all. I know we're probably this big group, we probably have every one of them covered. But, speak to your provider about what those symptoms may be from and what, if you can figure out how to pinpoint, there are some medications that can help with sleep. And then there's certainly some other things that we can recommend for sleep hygiene, things like not looking at screens before bed, getting into your routine. Some people like to, take certain supplements that help, melatonin, things like that. I can't prescribe or suggest, but, I would recommend, having a conversation with a provider about those, if that's something that you're dealing with.
Well, you know what, Emily, I would also say, with the medications, like, figure out, like, are you taking it in the morning? And, like, maybe you talk with your doctor and saying, hey, you know what, I've been taking this at night and I've noticed consistently I have insomnia. Maybe, but ask your doctor. But that's just like another thought of, oh, well, what time am I taking that medication? Because I think for a lot of us, our systems are so different, with how we used to be able to rest and maybe fall asleep and stay asleep. And now maybe we have difficulty falling asleep. And then we wake up, or we have, whatever other kind of difficulty. And it could just be, a change of the time of day and
Right.
taking that medication. So I just wanted to bring that up as well.
Absolutely. And I'll say, I mean, I have been I'm in the point in my life where I used to not understand what menopause was, right? When I was like the 25-year-old nurse that was like, oh yeah, symptom management, let's talk about this. Well, now that I'm right there in the right there with y'all, it's like, it's no joke. I mean, having these, having estrogen deprivation really does cause, sleep disturbance. For some people it's the falling asleep, for some people it's the staying asleep, for some people it's everything. So I see you, my friend, with the 26 years of not sleeping. I want to help. I want to address that, because how miserable is that? And I see a hand raised here. I'm trying to.
Ife.
Hey, Faye.
Oop.
I think she's muted.
Oop. How do I get you to how do I unmute you? Hold on, I'm gonna figure it out.
In the meantime, I'll just keep talking, and then when she gets off, we can hear from her. But I think depression is real. Sometimes it's situational depression. It's depression that's from the circumstance. Sometimes it's underlying depression that has been there all along. And then there's the relationship dynamic. So this, of course, covers everything, right? Every single person we relate to in life, whether it's work, family, dating, marriage, intimate relationships, with our family, with caregiving, maybe it's housework, and with your providers, right? Your providers, how do you handle those dynamics? As well as fellow survivors, so groups, group dynamics, how do you interact with other survivors that may have different ways of coping or different approaches to long-term survivorship? So these issues come up, especially as we, share stories and talk to one another. It can be difficult to have those relationships. So I just want to make space for kind of honor the fact that this is really tricky and can be tricky across the board, even in relationships like this, even in groups like this. There's dynamics that can be challenging. Did we figure out how to get
Yeah, I can't figure it out. Sorry, y'all. I keep hitting ask to unmute, and I'm not sure why I can't get her on.
The host cannot unmute. It has to be the participant who unmutes herself.
Yeah, because I've been hitting ask to unmute.
Yeah, you can do that, but she has to do the unmuting herself.
Yes, we did the muting.
Ife,
So,
can you hit it? on your, I think you're on your phone.
Maybe the three little dots. Ife, if you see the three little dots, you can unmute yourself. I'm gonna take a quick moment and look at the chat, but the other thing is memory. Who's got memory problems? I'm sitting here trying to find my words right now. Who's got memory problems?
I definitely have memory problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
chemo brain or brain fog.
Brain
And how long-
fog.
And how long does it last?
Well, I think it can be, I mean, I hate to say this, but it can be long term. You know, this is one of the long term effects. And so, you know, some of it, if it is having to do with our, you know, again, estrogen deprivation or the chemotherapy, you know, typically the effects lessen a bit after that sort of initial period of time. But many people, and it's well documented in the literature, have ongoing cognitive, you know, dysfunction or decline after treatment. So, and Kimberly's saying, yeah, chemo baby without having chemo, I had radiation. Yes. And the other piece of that is stress. You know, a lot of it is the stress. A lot of it is that, you know, mental toxicity, that mental load that we take on when we're going through something challenging. And when you're going through something challenging and then you survive it and you've gone through this trauma, then you're at risk for, you know, post-traumatic stress. So then you've got post-traumatic stress, which is what a lot of what we're talking about with these mental health distress concerns come up. Because, you know, for some people, I have a patient that has anticipatory nausea. She got adriamycin, I think it's been about 16 years ago. And when she comes in a certain door through the cancer center, she gets nauseous. It's just the act of going through that doorway. It's like her brain is like connecting, you know, just like Pavlov's dog. So she laughs about it and thinks it's kind of funny at this point, but she takes the long way. So she parks on the opposite side of the hospital and walks through, and she goes to the gift shop and does things that she normally wouldn't do to get to the radiation, or to the cancer center, because she just literally can't walk through that door. It is true, you know, true PTSD. So, you know, I think just being conscious of that and being aware that, you know, there are certain triggers, and that might be, you know, a smell, or it might be, you know, driving by a place that you had treatment, or it might be, you know, a food that you ate when you were having chemotherapy that, you know, didn't sit well with you, or things like that. But, you know, I think all of these things are anxiety, it's, you know, depression, and, you know, are very real long-term mental health concerns.
You know, Emily, I want to bring up like that, the PTSD again. And because I think I want to know how many of you, like, when you realize that maybe your heart would beat fast if you went by the exit of where your cancer center was, or like, I can give y'all a clear example. I can no longer watch Grey's Anatomy. I cannot watch any type of medical show, because as soon as I hear those beeps, I'm reminded instantly of chemo, and then waking up after surgery, and I've had multiple surgeries. And just like, it's things that I never thought about. And I used to think something was wrong with me, because when we think of PTSD, we're always thinking of the military. And it's like, wait, I think I'm actually suffering from PTSD. So, you know, I'm glad that you brought that up, Emily, and just want to like let everyone else know that it's, I don't like to say normal, but it's just, it's what happens when you've gone through trauma. And I actually had a doctor, an oncologist, tell me, she was like, you've experienced so much trauma with your cancer. And I never heard cancer and trauma in the same sentence. And then it really clicked. Oh, this is PTSD, because what has happened, whether you, if you had chemo, radiation, or if you had one or and not the other, or you did not have any chemo and radiation, all of that stress, Emily, that you were talking about, like all of that is part of it. And sometimes it can be triggered by something that when you least expect it too. So just know that you're definitely not alone in that. And that's why we're here connecting with you so you can talk about it.
And I wanted to address just one of the comments from Kimberly is talking about sleep. I've been asking her in the comments about integrative health, if she's seen an integrative health provider, because that sometimes the medical oncologists, are going to just give you, or psychiatrists might just, give you a prescription medication. I want to also plug palliative care. Palliative care, when we hear that word palliative care, we sometimes freeze because we think we're talking about hospice. I'm not talking about hospice. Palliative care is truly just symptom management. So palliative care is available to people who have chronic illness throughout the continuum. So, you can start palliative care the day you get your diagnosis, because it's really just about managing side effects and symptoms. So some of our palliative care providers are fantastic at helping to kind of figure out med management, and particularly around sleep, because it's such a huge part of quality of life, and being able to, have the impacting function, well-being, and cognitive function and working, and all of the productivity and all those things. So Kimberly, happy to talk offline. You'll have my contact information, at the end. Megan Claire knows how to get me. We can get you some support and get you some ideas, hopefully. So this list, this slide could literally be like a whole day long seminar, right? Physical concerns after cancer. So these are some of the ones that we talk about a lot or know a lot about. Lymphedema, that's the swelling that you might get from, having either radiation or surgery. To usually for breast cancer, it's the lymph nodes under your arm or inside of your breast. Sometimes it can be the lymph nodes, in your chest and other parts of your, kind of in the region of the breast. But that's what we, lymphedema is the swelling. So it's that, basically fluid getting into interstitial space, which is the space between connective tissue where fluid's not supposed to be. So that's when we see sometimes puffiness in the arm. It can be pain, pain in the shoulder and back, heaviness in the limb. Heart health, we know that this is also could be its own one day seminar, but heart health, particularly concerned with particular types of treatment. So people that get radiation to their, to the left breast are at higher risk sometimes from heart issues from the treatment. And then also certain medications, things like, if you had chemotherapy, particularly adriamycin, Herceptin is one that we look at, as a potential cardiotoxic medication. So typically your oncologist is, following you with, heart, with echocardiograms and things like that before treatment. After treatment, you're getting follow-up. If you're not and you're concerned, that's something to bring up with your provider. Bone health, we think about, what is the effect long-term of someone who's on, estrogen deprivation for 10 years, 5 years, or 10 years or longer. So that effect on, osteoporosis. We've talked in here about pain, and that is, again, just a huge topic, and we can go on and on. Fatigue, weight gain, metabolic changes. Many breast cancer patients are very surprised to find out that they're going to gain weight from their treatment. Again, it's the deprivation, it's the estrogen deprivation. It's the same reason it's harder for women to lose weight after menopause. Our bodies just hang on, right, to that excess weight. It's more difficult to lose weight. There's metabolic changes, and getting around can be harder when you're heavier. Then it sort of contributes to this cascade of other issues. If you're already having joint pain, and then you're, having some weight gain, and your knees and your back and your hips are impacted, this all sort of is a cascade. We talked about brain fog, cognitive changes, memory problems, menopausal symptoms. One we haven't talked so much about yet, but is sexual function and intimacy. This is one that I am super passionate about. I like to shame my fellow providers, for not doing a good job talking about it, because I think it's so important. I just really want to empower you to, if these are issues, if you're having sexual function issues, if you're having questions about intimacy and how your treatment impacts those, I really encourage you to advocate. Your providers should be talking to you about these side effects. If they're not, you should be, finding someone in the practice or a different provider, frankly, who's willing to address sexual side effects. So again, this could be its own whole long topic, and believe me, I've done hour-long talks just on sort of best practices around that. But I just want to normalize it, give you space to know that, if that's something that you're dealing with and concerned about, you have every right to address that. And then along those same lines, but slightly different, is that loss of fertility. This is a health concern, a late effect that many young women experience. Often there's so much urgency to get treatment started that there isn't adequate time to sort of stop and think through, how is this treatment? And really that's the case for all of these things. Many of these late effects are going to be printed in your, medication as, inserts, as side effects. You probably were told about some of these things, but it isn't really until, you've had a chance to sit down with your providers and say, hey, these are some of the issues that we, see with long-term breast cancer patients. These are some of the things you might experience, and sort of prepare. So from a fertility perspective, that can be really, really hard. Especially after the treatment is complete, it's harder. You have less resources and opportunities to preserve your fertility. The best time to preserve fertility is before you have any, systemic treatment. So, again, I just want to create space for the conversation around that, and for resources and support to be available for folks that might be having questions.
So a quick question, Emily, is like with the heart health, what should we be doing about that? Are there certain tests? Like, is there like a certain time, after so many years you get the heart checked out? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really depends a lot, like so many things, so individual. But I think this is where if your cancer clinic or your provider has a survivorship program, or has some academic centers and even some community centers have a late effects clinic or a cancer, follow-up clinic, that would be a great place. Some programs have they call it cardio oncology programs. And that's where oncology and cardiology kind of work together to follow patients. So where I work at Northside in Atlanta, we have a cardio oncology program. It's relatively new. So if you're haven't ever heard that term before, you may ask your doctor about it. Typically, if you've had one of these medications that's known to be cardiotoxic, you're going to have been given, a baseline echocardiogram and will be followed. But certainly if you're having side effects, if you're having concerns, suddenly you're having difficulty, getting winded going up the stairs, or you're noticing that it's, more effort to just do your normal, activities of daily living. You're walking out to your mailbox and you're feeling less, like you're short of breath, or that you feel like you're having a difficult time. Your heart's racing. You're noticing that, your heart rate, now with our smartwatches, we can sometimes measure heart rate. So if you have one of those, that's handy. But even if you just sit down and count your heart rate, if it's over 100, really 100, between 115 or higher, regularly, that's something to be watching and to let your provider know about. Typically, most of the people that have, treatment related heart issues, it's pretty much like that shortness of breath and that concern for the muscle, right? It's like a sign that the heart muscle is not working as effectively as it could. So it would definitely be something to follow up with a provider. Any other questions about these? I see fatigue is real.
I have another question for you,
Yeah.
related to what you're talking about. I'm just wondering, as a long-term survivor, is there any, I mean, I was on an AI and I'm just wondering, is there, I know BCI and other tests out there determine how long you should be taking it to reduce recurrence, but I'm just wondering overall, what is the general, answer in regards to that? How long should you be on an AI to reduce the recurrence? I've heard anywhere from 5, 7, 10, even 20 years. I mean, is that the answer, or is there anything definitive in regards to
Yeah,
that?
I think it depends. It's a great question, and I think one that comes up all the time. So the question is, how long am I on this, anti-estrogen therapy, basically? An AI, for those who don't know, is an aromatase inhibitor. So if you're postmenopausal, that's typically what you're put on. And the data is really depends. So it depends on the stage of the cancer. It depends on, how much estrogen, like if you were highly estrogen positive, which most women are, especially postmenopausal, that may come into it. If you're tolerating it well and there's some feeling that you may have, additional benefit, particularly if you're at risk for recurrence in your other breast, or, have some other reason why the concern might be higher for recurrence, they can go above, like a recommended above 10 years. Generally, the guidelines tell us, it's 5 years, early stage breast cancer, DCIS, early stage breast cancer 5, except for those who do the breast cancer index, and that can give you an elevated score, which can indicate a benefit to continuing that for another 5 years. And for those who don't know, that is a test that is done in the oncologist's office, and it basically gives you a score. It is similar to, it's not the same, but it is similar in terms of the way that it's done, to like the Oncotype technology, where it kind of looks at your particular individual breast cancer and gives you a risk that's personalized. So it gives you your own personal index, your own personal kind of score, to tell you whether you would benefit from additional years of that hormone therapy. So a very, very good conversation to have with your provider, to say, hey, based on the data that now, what do you think? We're not in a situation where somebody who's gone off of tamoxifen or gone off of aromatase inhibitors years ago is going back on them. It's not quite like that. But there is some, question about long-term. And these medications, we don't really necessarily want someone to be on them forever, right? Because they do have risks of their own. They have risks for, again, some of the things that are on this list, the impact on bone health, long-term side effects, symptoms that women typically just aren't interested in having: joint pain, arthralgias, menopausal symptoms, things like that. So I hope that answers your question. Basically, to say there is no real definitive, across the board information. These tests do give us some insight, on a person by person basis. But it really is personal and individualized, and something definitely to talk over with your oncologist.
Emily, Linda asked, what is that test called again?
So the one that we just talked about is the BCI, or breast cancer index. And it is, again, it's a test that they run on the tumor. So it's actual, they'll get, part of the tumor from your biopsy and send it off to this lab, and then they'll, takes a few weeks to get the report back. And it basically gives you a score that then can be interpreted as sort of what your likelihood of benefiting from additional years of therapy, of anti-estrogen therapy, would be.
Got it.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Putting it in the chat. Love the chat. All right. So when we talk about, so that's a long list. So how do we manage, these mental and physical concerns? So really, this is your oncology team's job. So your quality of life is your oncology team's job. And if that's not how you've been operating, then feel empowered to go forward with that mentality that, we're giving you medications to reduce your risk of recurrence in most cases, or if you do have advanced breast cancer and you're on therapy continuously, then we're there trying to make sure that the cancer doesn't progress. So those medications all have side effects, and so we're here to manage those side effects and to make sure that we're addressing these issues that are true quality of life issues. So there can be the traditional medical approach, and we talked about that, referral to a specialist, whether that's your oncologist saying, I'd really like you to see a cardiologist, or perhaps it's, I need you to see somebody that specializes in, mental health. Your symptoms seem to be really impacting your sleep and your well-being, and, I'm concerned about depression, psychiatrists, mental health professional counseling, whatever that may be. It may be to rehabilitation. So it may be for, in the case of lymphedema, or pelvic floor therapy for somebody that's having sexual side effects, somebody that's having pain when they urinate, or pain during sex because of the lack of estrogen, maybe have lost elasticity. Somebody that maybe hasn't been sexually active for a period of time and wants to be again, or multiple reasons why you might be referred to a rehab or physical therapist. But those are certainly some of them. If your providers have some sort of survivorship clinic, or have some sort of a provider, typically it's a nurse practitioner or PA, or somebody that is seeing patients sort of to address these kinds of issues, then that would be, the recommendation. There's certainly prescription medicine, but then there's also, and I had mentioned in one of the comments asking about integrative therapy, complementary is really where we're at, I think, these days. I think the more we can do to create, more support and have the mind and the body working together, and not against each other, the better, outcome. So whether that's an integrative practitioner that works alongside your oncologist, some wonderful programs have that as part of the integrated sort of part of the cancer services. If your cancer center doesn't have that, you certainly can go looking for it. You certainly can find it, either in some things now with telemedicine, some things are available, even distantly. You can have a consult and they can recommend things. Obviously, if you're having hands-on things like massage or acupuncture, things like that, that can't be done telemedicine. But certainly the recommendations can be for some of those things, and then referrals to providers that are closer to you.
Well, because you've answered quite a few of the questions that were submitted with registration. But one, in dealing with all of the side effects and the pain and all of that, someone asked, what are some ways to replace some of the physicality of just existing through a day? And I wanted to say that what I have done, because would y'all know that I am in a lot of pain right now, right? And so I've learned I don't multitask as much as I used to. How many of you used to be all over the place? You didn't have to write anything down. You could do this or that. It's small changes. And I can give you a clear example, laundry. I used to be one of those. I wanted to get all of the loads done, that done, period. But I've realized now physically, my body cannot handle that. It cannot handle all that stress of constantly getting up, getting down, folding. It exhausts me. It fatigues me. And so now I have learned to kind of modify. So it's really about modifying some of your activities and really listening to your body saying, hello, we need to rest. Because trust me, your body will shut you down when you're not listening to it. Right? Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the question, you put it so beautifully, and now I'm blanking on exactly how you asked about it.
Yeah. How do we replace, the physicality of certain things just existing, and when we have to go to events, because now our bodies aren't, for some of us, some are able to get back to their pre-cancer bodies, but those of us who are not and have to deal in pain, what are some different things that we could do?
Yeah, that's great. I think, I think one of the things is just to recognize those limitations and not try to fight yourself, right? Lower the bar, right? And that doesn't mean settle for less. It just means have realistic expectations. And maybe, it's dividing up the things. So it's maybe, instead of trying to do it all in one morning, do all the housework on one morning, you're dividing it up in smaller increments, and you're, and also that you're trying to find joy, right? And things, try to find the things that you enjoy and do those things. How do you get somebody to exercise? You ask them, what do you love to do? You loved to play basketball when you were a kid. So it may not be going to the gym and doing the pickup basketball game, but maybe it's, shooting baskets, or maybe it's, taking a walk around, around the court, or, maybe it's dribbling the ball with your friend or your neighbor, or your grandkid, your child, whatever it may be. Just find those things that bring you joy. The other thing that I would say is just really finding a mindfulness practice. And that doesn't necessarily mean a physical practice. It doesn't have to be yoga, although it certainly could be. It doesn't have to be sitting with meditation. Maybe it's journaling. Maybe it's, listening to meditate, like, quiet music, or, you love the symphony. So maybe it's listening to classical music for 15 minutes a day, where you just do nothing but get into a comfortable position and just give yourself that freedom, that space, that time to just let your brain, let your mind just be calm. It's something different for everybody, to be honest. And I think one of the beauties of these kinds of groups, and also mental health support, is, talking through lots of different options and figuring out what it is that works for you. But those are some of the things that come to mind. Is that kind of what you're thinking about?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, I love some of the, okay. What is Reiki? I want to let y'all know that we are actually going to be having a wellness series in 2024 that is going to talk about Reiki and those different types of like meditations and the mindfulness. It's going to touch on that. And so just now I already had that in the pipeline.
I will say Reiki is awesome. It's a energy practice. So it can be hands-on, but you can also have remote Reiki sessions. And if you know that, but it's a technique that is taught. It's from a Japanese technique that people can be trained basically as energy workers. They can put hands on, and it's basically just to help with energy restoring. It can be healing. It can be mental health concerns. It can be energy. It can be pain. It does help sometimes. Some people have had help with sleep and fatigue and things like that. It's a great kind of mind-body practice that can be combined with, with other more traditional practices. So and I'm thrilled to hear that you're going to do a wellness series, because I think these are great things to introduce to people who may not be familiar. Because again, what works for one person may not work for another person. You may be in a group with somebody that says, I just lather my whole body with, lavender oil and, I feel better. Well, that doesn't necessarily help everybody, although it may help somebody fall asleep or relax. And then I know I'm cognizant of time, so I know we can talk about this forever and ever, but what are some of the things that, how does this sort of manifest? So, these are, sorry, I'm trying to look at this. Good thing I'm going to let Megan Claire be our guide. I'm just going to do my talking. We talked about scanxiety. We talked about just worry and just, fear of recurrence. Megan Claire talked about cancerversary. A lot of times it is bittersweet. It is back to that both ends. It's that time where you remember where you were. Maybe it was 7 years ago or 10 years ago. Where was I when I found out? Where was I when I got the call, or when I was diagnosed, or when I was told that I had cancer? Some people feel a lot of ownership of that day and want to say, it's been 7 years and I'm a survivor. Some people feel incredibly triggered by that day. And so I think just to be sensitive to and thoughtful about your, responses about that. Certainly to just in general, I think it is so healthy to be in community like this, where you can feel vulnerable and you can talk about your feelings and concerns and be validated. That you notice those triggers, that follow-up appointments, waiting for results, things that make you anxious or more anxious than maybe you were before. How do you recognize those things? Is it through journaling or support groups? I like to always talk to patients when they tell me that they're seeing some things in themselves maybe that they're concerned about. is it time to refer them to a specialist? Do they need a therapist? If you're finding yourself kind of processing and doing a lot of, what I call kind of couch therapy with your friends and your neighbors, it may be time to get a professional involved and have somebody that you can talk through some of these things with. And I think a great way to kind of couch that and figure that out is, to talk to your healthcare provider, whoever your oncologist or whoever you see on a regular basis. I'm having these intrusive thoughts. I'm having difficulty sleeping. I'm having a lot of anxiety around the time that I was diagnosed. Can you refer me to somebody, or do you think it would be appropriate for me to see somebody? And they're almost always going to say yes, because we want to make sure that we've provided, our patients with those resources so that they can really work through these things that will continue. I wish I could say this is all going to go away, on that 5th anniversary of your cancer diagnosis, but it isn't. A lot of this is ongoing. It's, it is not necessarily continuous, but it is something that, can be a continual part of being a survivor. It's that paradox we talked about, right an hour ago, early on.
And to say too, don't be afraid to ask for professional help. I am very open about my mental health struggles post-cancer because so many things changed. And so, I like to say audition. You're a therapist or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, whatever like fits for you, because at the end of the day, like this was big. Like breast cancer, your experience was big, right? And so it is only natural that there is going to be some anxiety and difficulty like processing that. And everyone processes their own experience in their time. And so just remember, that's why you have this community here to, talk it out, because a lot of times our family and friends, don't want to hear it anymore. And I call it cancer land. So just know that with you needing professional help and maybe even medication, which I like to call a buffer, because sometimes you just need a little buffer to help with that anxiety. Don't feel bad that that's what you need. If it's what you need, it's what you need. And at the end of the day, right, like we just want to make sure, like even what you're saying here with like self-care routines, like if you're noticing I still need help, that it's okay. And it doesn't mean that you're not strong enough and that you're not handling this.
Absolutely. And I would say, if you want, most oncology practices have a social worker or a mental health professional on staff. So if you that's a great first kind of resource. So if you don't already have that connection with oncology social work, and I will be honest with you, some early stage breast cancer patients never meet that person because in the practice, it is deemed that they don't need that person, which is ridiculous. So often the oncology social worker is assigned when a patient is, being admitted to the hospital or is, going to be outpatient resource, long-term needing, lots of different resources. And often those early stage patients just simply don't get the referral because the providers are like, oh, you're doing great. Look at you. You're going home. You're moving on. You're taking care of life. So that's not the best practice. That's not how it should be. But I'm just being real with you. If you've never asked or didn't know or don't know if there's an oncology social worker in the practice, that's probably because somebody made the assumption that you were doing great and you didn't need them. So feel empowered to ask. And if you don't have someone, I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say that I was feeling very anxious and was thinking about therapy. And I was talking to a therapist who was in my gym class at the gym. And she said, and I mentioned it, and she said, all of her patients who have had cancer have fears about recurrence. So that, it made me feel better to know that everyone felt that way.
It's so true.
Thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know a single person who has had a diagnosis who doesn't have some concern about recurrence. So 100%. You know, I don't personally like this term new normal. I think that it's it's not really real. It's not new normal. It's not there's nothing normal about it. It's kind of like I like Cancerland. I like that. Megan Claire might start taking that one out for a drive because I like the way that sounds, and it just does sort of normalize the fact that you're really entering a new place, or you've entered a new place. So, you know, I think again, we've mentioned lots of different ways that this can, you know, look and what the support looks like, but I encourage you, you know, this week to really try something maybe that you haven't tried before. So, you know, if you're a journaling person, you know, but you haven't ever done, you know, um, a cooking class, or, you know, looked at, you know, some other way to kind of support yourself. I'm just, you know, I think routines are great. You know, having walking buddies, having people that you can connect with, um, you know, self-care splurges. I mean, sometimes we act like massage is a big splurge, but for some people, that's a really great way to just normalize, make sure that they're getting support. So they just book a massage, you know, as often as they can afford to, whether that's weekly or monthly or once a quarter or even once a year, you know, just looking forward to that opportunity to have, you know, something special, a weekend trip, a fancy meal, something to kind of, you know, give yourself a routine, give yourself something to look forward to, and to spend time with family and friends, or sometimes, depending on what stage of life you're in and where you are, you know, it may be planning to spend time away, you know, being alone or going away with a friend that you can really, um, you know, be unburdened with. Um, so those are just, you know, throwing some ways to kind of manage some of the support. And I'm sorry we've gone over. I knew this was gonna happen. Will can these slides be a part of what they can access?
Absolutely. We will make sure that we get this on our website so people will be able to see, because, you know, I'm glad that you mentioned like the bone loss and the hot flashes. You
And
know,
this really could also be, I'd be happy to make this into like a handout that can be in an email too. Can we do that?
let's do that.
Okay. Because I think some of these things are good resources, you know, also conversation starters, for folks that might want to have a conversation with their providers or partner or, you know, care team with some of these things. So really, managing some of the more common symptoms of estrogen deprivation, bone loss, hot flashes, night sweats. These are all things that we've kind of brought up. I'm sorry, sweetie.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like in the chat, the Barbie movie, Susan. Yeah, it's like seeing like what Emily was mentioning, seeing a funny movie or something. I agree. Like sometimes you just gotta escape.
It's possible that I've seen Barbie 3 times, just saying.
Do you have any last words for us, Emily, before we wrap this up? And we will, you know, again, we can talk offline to get more of this information out.
Yeah, I'll get you guys a handout with all of the symptom management stuff, because I think that is really good, especially just not just for information, but for, you know, for having follow-up conversations. So my sort of take homes are to focus on what you can control. So, you know, if you're still getting mammograms, if you still have breast tissue, getting your MRIs and you know, mammograms and MRIs set up, get your colonoscopies, pap smears. These are things you can be proactive about. You know, you can do the things to care for yourself, not just self-care in terms of the mental and emotional, but actually to, you know, to be proactive. You know, genetic testing, if you're somebody that, you know, was recommended for genetic testing, some of us just never made it back, you know, to get that done. Encouraging you to do that, especially these days as more and more treatment can be, you know, related to our, you know, genetics and genomics and things like that. A screening buddy is a great thing. So get somebody that you can have that accountability for. You know, say, hey, I'm going to get my mammogram on the 25th. I encourage you to do it too. And then when you both do it, you get to go celebrate. Go to a movie, take her to the Barbie movie, go have lunch, go do something fun. You know, eating well can be a message that you hear about over and over again. It sounds so terrible, but there's some fun, especially these days. TikTok, online, find a cooking class, you know, go do something really fun that sort of takes you out of your comfort zone around food, and make it about enjoying eating in a healthy way. Secondary prevention like smoking cessation, limiting alcohol, these are things that you can do, you have control over. You can manage stress, coping, and then just also remember that you have resources like referrals to physical therapy, not just when you're in pain, but also to restore your function. If you start to notice that you've been on, maybe a aromatase inhibitor for a few years and you've got a lot of joint pain or back pain, a physical therapist can help you address some of that, with mobility, stretching, sometimes massage, they can kind of get in there and help, and it really feels good to get you kind of back moving, and that can be really empowering. And then plan ahead. I think the people that I see who are doing well as cancer survivors are people that have things to look forward to on the horizon. And that's not just huge big trips, but certainly could be, but it may just be, every Friday they do something, with a friend, or they call their loved ones, or they, have a family Zoom, or whatever it is that sort of makes them live into the future and look ahead. Those are things that I think really help to give somebody purpose and give somebody something, to take their mind off the difficulty that they may be facing. And, talk about it. Things like this, having forums like this where we can just kind of let it out, discuss. I'd love feedback on this, and just what you've gotten. Hopefully it's been helpful, maybe sparked some things and thoughts about how you can take better care of yourself. And I'm sure we missed things. This was a huge topic to try to get to in an hour, but I really want to be available to you for anything that you haven't gotten, either now or offline, email, after this is done.
So yes, we will make sure when we send out the slides, yes, we will make sure that we give you Emily's information. She's amazing. Just excited to have been able to bring y'all a little bit of Georgia. I know a lot of y'all, are from all over, but a lot of New York folks. So this was just real thrilling for me. And Emily, thank you so much, because I was actually treated at Northside for my breast cancer. And, remember everyone, you can always reach out to me, Megan Claire, and we're here for you. So when you have ideas or you want to hear even more of something that Emily mentioned, let us know. All right. So everyone, again, last words, Emily.
Just thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions and your willingness to give up an hour of your time to sit and listen, and to be there for each other. I did see a couple of questions that came through the chat that we didn't get to, so I apologize for that. If there is something specific, I think I saw somebody asked about triple negative breast cancer, so I'm happy to talk offline or chat about that specifically. I know we talked a lot about estrogen, so for folks that are triple negative breast cancer survivors, there's obviously they're having different side effects from their treatment, so I don't want to minimize that. I think the question was about new treatments for triple negative breast cancer, which I'm happy to say yes, there are some that have come out in the last couple of years. So it's a good time in terms of drug development, what we're seeing in the pipeline. So finally, it's been a long time since we've had new approvals for folks with negative breast cancer. So I'm happy to talk more. If you want to email me or text me or call me or whatever, we can chat about this more specifically. But we are we're in it's a better things are looking up. And just in general, I just appreciate y'all and look forward to hopefully continuing this conversation.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just putting Emily's email real quick in the chat, but again, we will send that out with her slides. We're going to create a document, a downloadable for you. So we will have that in a few weeks. And again, thank you so much for spending time with us. And remember, we're here for you. You're not alone. And reach out, because we're here. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Hi.